Welcome to my cockpit. I'm your host and narrator, Captain Tobias Steele. Relax with me as I take you on a sensual and exciting voyage across the galaxy. Unleash your science fiction fantasies with these action-packed tales featuring mature and provocative adventures. Viewer discretion is advised. A strange thing happened at the peace talks. Story 3. While both Earth and Xeondrax were members of the Galactic Alliance, they had been locked in a brutal, centuries-long war over territories and trade routes, with previous attempts at brokering peace ending in failure. The Xeondraxians, an aggressive patriarchal warrior species, viewed compromise as weakness. Earth, steadfast, refused to yield control of strategic trading zones. 60 years after the catastrophic loss at Antaeus Prime, the Galactic Alliance intervened, imposing severe sanctions and demanding an immediate ceasefire. Exhausted and depleted, both factions reluctantly agreed. While neither side formally conceded, they eventually permitted supervised trade and cautious interactions, overseen vigilantly by the Galactic Alliance peacekeepers. Although militarily weaker, the Galactic Alliance wielded its collective diplomacy effectively through the financial sectors, eventually persuading both Earth and Xeondrax to enter official peace negotiations. All agreed to a diplomatic summit. However, there was a catch. Earth had to send its delegation to Xeondrax itself, the homeworld of their enemies. The Xeondraxians saw this as a power play, believing that Xeondrax's immense gravity would render human diplomats vulnerable and at a disadvantage during negotiations. The Xeondraxians were a hulking species, weighing over 900 pounds and standing at an impressive 12 foot tall when fully erect. With thick frames, they bore large protective plate ridges covering their posteriors. Even though they lumbered with a hunched gape, they were nonetheless imposing and vicious. Xeondrax was a beautiful world of towering mountainous landscapes, its cities carved into vast subterranean caverns. No human had ever set foot on their world until now. The negotiations were held in an enormous cavernous hall, its stone walls lined with intricate glyphs. The atmosphere was rich in oxygen, but for most non-Xeondraxians, gravity stabilizer suits were a necessity. At the ornately carved round meeting table, 3 figures sat at its center. Warlord Kudak, the highest-ranking Xeondraxian present at the negotiations, the Grand Speaker of the Galactic Alliance, an impartial mediator and recorder, and representing Earth, leader of the Darkstar Commandos, Major General Alex Murphy. He was accompanied by a single escort, Darkstar Commando Michael Kincaid. While Murphy sat stiffly, observing the room with practiced neutrality, Kincaid remained relaxed, though his presence was anything but insignificant. As the discussions began, Kincaid watched the towering Xeondraxian guards, noting the way they subtly flexed their thick limbs, their postures oozing dominance, as if testing to see if the humans would cower in their presence. Then, the first shock of the meeting occurred. Murphy and Commando Kincaid, in synchronization, removed their helmets from what was assumed to be gravity stabilizer suits. Small jets of gas hissed as the pressurized air from within escaped. Murphy placed his helmet on the table while Kincaid attached his to a magnetic connector on the back plate of his battle armor. A ripple of shock and murmurs spread through the hall from the Xeondraxians. The Galactic Alliance Grand Speaker made sure to note these actions in his holo tablet for the historical record. The Xeondraxians had assumed no human could withstand their planet's gravity without artificial assistance. They were wrong. The talks continued. An hour in, another unexpected event occurred just as Warlord Kudak prepared to make a forceful declaration. A 6-inch long, centipede-like creature fell from the cavern's towering ceiling, landing with a barely perceptible plop on the stone table, before scurrying with blinding speed up Warlord Kudak's massive arm. Before anyone could react, it vanished under the topmost bony plate ridge on his back. Warlord Kudak, for all his might, stiffened instantly. A deep scowl crossed his face. He let out a low, rumbling grunt, his massive hands twitching involuntarily. Then, without a word, his massive frame fell onto the floor, clawing at the air. His guards reacted instantly. They rushed forward, but Warlord Kudak gritted his teeth and waved them off. He climbed back into his seat, adjusting his bulk as though nothing had taken place. Then, as if dismissing the incident entirely, he resumed his statement. General Murphy and Commando Kincaid exchanged a glance. Murphy's expression was stone cold. The sharp look in his eyes gave Kincaid a silent command. Do not acknowledge what just happened. Kincaid, however, arrogantly smirked. Clearing his throat, he leaned forward slightly and spoke. Sorry for the interruption, Your, Warlordship, with all due respect. Are you okay? The great hall grew still. Nairn Kudak's deep-set eyes narrowed at Kincaid in confusion. Okay? He quizzically repeated slowly. Kincaid tilted his head. Sir, some kind of creature crawled under your, backplate thingy? Warlord Kudak snorted, then chuckled, a low, gravelly sound. Oh, splids, he grunted dismissively. They're creatures that lay eggs under our ridge plates. They lay their eggs and die within a few days. Awful, terrible little beasts. Commando Kincaid's brow furrowed and he instinctively replied, They motherfucking what? Warlord Kudak let out a deep sigh as he rolled his massive shoulders and said, They itch, but we endure the irritation until we reach the baths for a soaking. He scratched absent-mindedly at his middle ridge plate and continued, Even then, their eggs are still difficult to remove. Kincaid glanced at General Murphy, who now had murder in his eyes, silently begging Kincaid to shut the fuck up. Ignoring him, Kincaid turned back to Warlord Kudak and arrogantly grinned. If you want, I can take a look for you and try to kill the one that just crawled up in there. Another collective gasp rippled through the room. A human? Touching a Xeondraxian? The mere suggestion seemed unthinkable. For a moment, Warlord Kudak hesitated. He could still feel the parasite moving beneath his ridge plate, disturbing the others already nestled there. His eye twitched. Finally, the warlord grunted. I suppose your limbs are dexterous enough to remove it. The moment Kincaid took a step forward, Kudak's guards reacted instantly and raised their pulse spears. Warlord Kudak lifted a hand. The guards froze, standing down and lowering their weapons. Slowly, Kincaid approached the warlord's towering form. Kudak shifted, adjusting his weight and hunched over as Kincaid placed a steady hand on his upper ridge plate. Lifting it just enough to see underneath, Kincaid's spectrum vision reacted to the dark crevice. He stifled a reaction at the squirming mass beneath. The creatures they called splids writhed damply around, their slick, segmented bodies glistening in the dim light. Keeping his expression neutral, Kincaid reached inside, grabbing the parasites one by one and crushing them between his armored glove. He then carefully raised Warlord Kudak's additional plates, repeating the process. The whole time, Warlord Kudak emitted a slight humming sound, and his eyes rolled and squinted in ecstasy. With split goo on his shielded hands and pooled on the ground at his feet, Kincaid said, I killed most of the ones I could see. But you got a lot of those tiny eggs in there. With a slight grin, Kincaid added, "Sorry I don't have anything to really get in there and clean them out for you." Warlord Kudak, feeling relieved, attempted to compose himself and cleared his throat. The Galactic Alliance Grand Speaker was perplexed, but eagerly made sure to note the interactions on his hollow tablet for the historical record. Kudak stated, "We have a difficult time removing the eggs, and the medicated baths only do so much." Warlord Kudak paused and said tenderly, "You would clean them out for me, even after Antarius Prime?" The question oozed suspicion and caution. Seizing the opportunity, Kincaid solemnly stated, "Earth lost many great men at Antarius Prime. However, we now have an opportunity. As two of the strongest species in the galaxy, with the help of the Alliance, we can restore peace. I believe we can coexist, grow together, and not annihilate one another over trade routes and territories. Plus, in light of what just happened, humans have a saying, 'If you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.'" Warlord Kudak's eyes squinted as he paused momentarily to take in Commando Kincaid's words. He then said, "Perhaps we should continue our negotiations at tomorrow's light." Warlord Kudak then looked schemingly at Kincaid and Murphy and proclaimed, "This evening I would like to take Commando Kincaid up on his offer, to clean out the rest of the eggs." Kincaid turned and looked to General Murphy for an immediate out, hoping his expression would signal to the general to provide a respectable declination to the warlord's offer. General Murphy, in turn, gleefully and maniacally replied to Warlord Kudak's invitation with a broad smile. Darkstar Commando Kincaid would be more than happy to represent Earth and assist you with your cleansing this evening. That evening, Commando Michael Kincaid arrived at the Sacred Grand Bathing Hall, deep within the subterranean city of the Xeandraxian capital. The chamber was vast, hewn from ancient rock, the ceilings towering overhead with bioluminescent veins running through the walls, casting a faint indigo glow over the steaming pools. The air was thick with humidity, and the faint metallic scent of Xeandraxian skin mingled with minerals from the thermal waters. Inside the largest central pool chamber, Warlord Kudak lounged. 12 foot and over 600 pounds, his enormous frame was partially submerged as his 3 high admirals sat around him, their hulking masses relaxed in the heated waters. On a separate elevated platform, the Galactic Alliance Grand Speaker observed and took notes for the historical record, a witness to a new kind of diplomacy in the making. Kincaid entered the large chamber. The room quieted as all eyes settled on him. Remembering his diplomatic training, he officially and properly greeted each representative. Warlord Kudak lifted his head, his ridged brow heavy with contemplation, as Kincaid stood before him, clad in his Darkstar Commando uniform, the plated armor clinging to his genetically enhanced frame, muscles evident even through the suit. Kincaid was a towering figure at 8 feet tall, sculpted through decades of biological augmentation, extreme gravity training, and battlefield conditioning. Warlord Kudak rumbled, his deep voice echoing and carrying through the steamy air. He said, "I have spoken to my admirals about the satisfaction I experienced when you removed the creatures from my plates." His heavy lids lowered slightly, in what could only be a look of indulgence. "They too have suffered long with these irritants." Kincaid remained silent for a moment before inhaling sharply. Then, with a deliberate and unflinching motion, he reached for the bolt fastener clasps under the chest plate of his suit. It hissed, the emitting gas mixing with the steam in the air. With slow precision, he peeled away his commando armor. The Xeondraxians watched him intently as they blew thick plumes of smoke from their pipes. Kincaid continued with unfastening the heavy plates until he was left standing in only his tight compression briefs. The heat of the bathhouse kissed Kincaid's thick skin. His body was a masterpiece of engineering and endurance, thick cords of muscle shifting in the ambient glow of the cavern's luminescent walls. He bore the marks of past battles, pale scars cut across his chest and arms, each telling the story of a warrior. Finally, with a smirk and a firm tug, he shed the last of his briefs, his towering frame stepping into the pool completely bare, the water parting around his massive thighs as he waded toward Warlord Kudak. The warlord stirred. The water cascaded in waterfalls from his immense body as he lifted himself onto a large, smooth stone ledge, exposing his bare body entirely. His flesh was sturdy and powerful, his guts solid with strength, his limbs monstrous in size. His bony ridges glistened, and below them, the powerful curvature of his muscular haunches flexed as he repositioned himself, laying forward, his overlapping ridge plates rising and lowing slightly. Kincaid had fought in fierce battles, traversed dangerous gas nebulas, and survived vacuum exposure. This was merely a different kind of operation. Kincaid began his assigned mission. He looked at the tools they laid on an adjacent table beside him. Gloves, long-handled scrapers, brushes, and a hose connected to a mineral cleansing solution. With gloved hands, Kincaid pried open the first ridge plate, exposing the slick, humid crevice underneath. The moment Kincaid began to scrape underneath, Warlord Kudak exhaled deeply, a low, resonant hum vibrating through his massive chest. Kincaid went to work. He dragged the scraper along the fleshy ridges, clearing away the embedded split eggs, crushing any remaining parasites, their bodies popping between his fingers as he worked. His hands moved methodically, alternating between the abrasive brush, the thick hose, and his own dexterous grip, ensuring every inch of Warlord Kudak's ridges was cleansed. Kudak grunted, shifting his weight, his burly muscles tensing under the attention. The deep, satisfied hum that had started at the base of his throat grew louder. His breath became heavier. As Kincaid began to attack the underside of the next larger plate, he realized he needed a better angle to really deep clean. Once Kincaid grabbed the comb rake-like instrument, he realized he had no choice but to straddle the back of Warlord Kudak. The commando swung his muscular leg over the warlord, positioning himself, once secure. Kincaid methodically used the tool to forcefully comb away the eggs from the coarse, wild boar-like tufts of hair between Kudak's ridge plates. Thoroughly cleaning under the plates, Kincaid then used the coarse wire-like brush to clean the rough outside. Apparently, Xeondraxians' bony plate ridges, while having tough exteriors, also have sensitive nerve endings. Warlord Kudak claws curled with pleasure as the brush stroked across his ridges. As Kincaid finished the final plate ridge, he didn't stop. Instead, he moved lower, using the coarse brush to exfoliate the rough areas of Kudak's lower back, trailing down to the powerful mounds of his thick haunches. The moment the brush met his scaly buttocks, Kudak shuddered. The humming sound deepened, his massive fingers flexing and clenching against the stone ledge. By the time Kincaid poured the final rinse over Kudak's body, the warlord lay completely slack and limp, his mammoth body draped over the ledge, his breaths deep and even. The aggression and savagery that once radiated from him had been subdued, replaced with a kind of reverence for the human in his service. Flustered, the Galactic Alliance Grand Speaker turned up the cooling system within his gravity-stabilizing suit. He then eagerly made notations upon his hollow tablet for the historical record. As Warlord Kudak stood up from the ledge, Kincaid smiled and raised an eyebrow to the Warlord. For his part, Warlord Kudak slightly bowed his immense frame and apologized, as he attempted to hide his obvious arousal. From behind, a deep, gravelly voice rumbled. "Earth Commando, I must ask, might you offer your skills to us as well?" Kincaid turned to see one of the High Admirals, a behemoth of a Xeondraxian, his bony plates twitching in discomfort, his eyes betraying a cautious plea. Then another spoke. "And I as well. I have suffered these parasites for cycles." One by one, the three hulking admirals of Xeondrax, once the terror of human military forces, now approached with hesitant reverence, their dominant, violent personas, muted by the prospect of relief at the hands of one of Earth's elite warriors. Kincaid allowed himself a smirk of appreciation. He reached for another brush with his left hand, and with his right hand he firmly placed it on the buttocks of the nearest warlord. With a firm grip, he guided him to the stone ledge for his cleansing. Epilogue: The Lasting Bond. After the peace treaty was signed within 2 cycles, an Earth embassy was established on Xeondrax, an unprecedented gesture of goodwill. The Darkstar Commandos, being the only humans capable of handling the gravity, were deployed as Xeondrax's special ambassadors. The deep cleanings became a sacred diplomatic practice performed exclusively by the Darkstar Commandos, and the Xeondraxians doted upon their new human allies. At times, the Xeondraxians were even giddy around the Commandos. For their part, the Commandos did not take this act lightly, and had great admiration for the Xeondraxian warlords and soldiers. These were Earth's former sworn enemies, who were now literally exposing their backsides to humans, proving how much they entrusted them in their care. And soon, a new tradition was born. While cleansings regularly took place, the Xeondraxian warlords decided to hold an annual ceremony, honoring those that died at the Battle of Antaeus Prime and the peace treaty that followed decades later. They called the ceremony the Ritual of Deep Cleansing. The Xeondraxians, a battle-hardened empire, became putty in the hands of the Earth's commandos. When the time came for the next annual ceremony, Kincaid and his fellow commandos had a surprise for their new allies. The commandos introduced lavender and coconut oils to the cleansing rituals, and it drove the Xeondraxians wild. For eons, the Xeondraxians' power, domination, and brutality was absolute. Their might was undisputed amongst the galaxy. But beneath their bony plates, in the presence of the right touch from an Earth commando, they emitted a deep hum. The end of Story 3. Please feel free to leave a comment, like, or subscribe. It helps share this story with other science fiction listeners. To view Story 4, The Transporting of Delegate Socox, click the thumbnail on the screen or visit the playlist. Thank you for watching.